It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in to the Take Command podcast. Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here. And this week, Logan, we are going to give the people everything but what we've been talking about nonstop since January. We are going to go into the rest of the NFL draft. Obviously, the entire future of the Commanders organization really does hinge in a lot of ways. They're a major pivot point on that number 2 pick. I mean, the Niners have proven that you can miss on a top 5 pick at quarterback and still have it all work out in the end. So it's not like if that pick fails, the whole thing, just shut it down, we're over. But, obviously we spent undue time on that because if you get that pick right, the trajectory of the franchise changes immensely. But there are 250-something picks after the top 2, and there's a lot of football players to talk about. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through each position group, including quarterback outside of kind of the group of 4 that we have talked about. And then we're going to do the offense today, the defense later on in the week, and give the highlights, the players that we like, the players that we don't like as much as everyone else. And then something that we hinted at last week, Logan, that I think we're actually just on a personal level most excited about, the freak list for each one. Who is the best athlete of the position in the 2024 NFL draft? Anything else you want to add on the front end here?
No, as always, Craig, you did a great job kind of laying it all out there. So I think we should just get it started.
All right, let's do it. We're going to start is where there's a lot of people think we should start. Always start with your lines. You got to build out your line. So we're going to start with the offensive line, and we're going to start outside at tackle, and then we'll go to the interior guys. And I think this tackle class is really interesting, Logan, because I feel like the number of players who are in the upper echelon has grown as the process has gone on. Guys like Amarius Mims, guys like J.C. Latham have joined the Joe Alts. Olu Fashanu's stock is all over the place, depending on where you ask. And so, like what does your tiers look like at tackle in terms of this class? And is it really, in your mind, as deep as a lot of people say it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a great point there. One of the things about this group that's so interesting is like you had guys like Tyler Guyton, Amarius Mims, even Troy Fautanu to a certain extent, the tackle from UW, who I think a lot of people thought would be there when Washington was picking at 36. But now, kind of as the draft gets ever closer, like it's almost like clockwork. Those guys just get pushed up and up and up because it's hard to find big athletic dudes. So I think if I was going to give you my big board or my kind of tops at the position, I'd probably go Joe Alt would be my first guy. First or second guy, I really like this. I really like Talisi Fuaga from Oregon State, the tackle. The only reason I give Alt a slight edge is I think Fuaga might be a guard at the next level. Either way, my confidence level in Fuaga being an excellent football player is extremely high. So either whether it's right tackle or it's guard, I think you've got a guy who's got a nasty streak. He's got a physicality. He's got a technical acumen that you really like. And Joe Alt, I think a lot of people have as kind of like this blue chip prospect. I don't quite feel the same way about him. I think when you see him in person, he's a little bit younger in terms of his physicality than I think a lot of people are aware of. So I think I think they're close, but I think he's going to be a good pro. I think the problem with him is he's not going to be a good pro this year. It might be next year or the following year. Just what does his runway look like? Is it 6 games? Is it 2 seasons? Is it 3 seasons? Is he Colton Miller where he doesn't get good until it's time to give him an extension? I don't know. But I think that's kind of my first tier. I'd probably put Troy Fautanu, if not in that tier, in the one right below it. He's the tackle guard from UW. He's 6'4", 315. And I mean, he's just such a tremendous athlete. He's not Trent Williams athletic, but in terms of his twitch and his snap, I got vibes of that, shades of that, obviously. And I'm not saying it's a 1-to-1 comparison there, but that's the kind of athlete that gets you excited about the position. He measured in at 34-inch arms at the combine, which to me is a huge deal because everyone thought he was for sure a guard. I thought he was for sure a guard, but with that type of length, you say, and the type of foot speed he's got, maybe that's the guy. Then I'd probably go Fashanu after that. Fashanu, Guyton, and then Amarius Mims would be my next tier. And I'd throw J.C. Latham in there as well. It's kind of that. And maybe, so let me backtrack that a little bit. I'd probably put J.C. Latham in the same tier as Troy Fautanu, and then I'd probably go Fashanu, the tackle from Penn State, Mims, and then Guyton. That's how I would probably flesh that out.
So are you comfortable with all of those guys going in the top 20? Because it feels like where mock drafts are, that kind of is where this is trending. Like there's going to be a run, and I would say there's 6 guys there: Alt, Fontenau, Fuaga, Fashanu, Latham, Mims, or 7 if you include Guyton. And the way some of these mock drafts are going, like, they might all go in the top 20, certainly in the top 25. Now, there's also a chance that there's a run on some other position, and then all of a sudden, you get a run on wide receivers, and all of a sudden one of these guys is available for you at 36, which would be sick. But like, if you're a team drafting inside the top 20, are you comfortable taking all of those guys, or is that a little too rich?
Yeah, I think, if I was going to give a range for like Amarius Mims or Tyler Guyton, I'd probably say in a perfect world, it's between 25 and 35 is where you're picking those guys. And I think with Mims, again, the physicality is insane. Watching him on film, I mean, there's not many people on the face of the planet that look like him. We talk about freaks, like he's going to be in the conversation for that for sure. And then Tyler Guyton, again, kind of is a physical freak, the way he moves, the way he bends. It's going to push him up. But I think when you look at their film, like Guyton is a little inconsistent in 2023, much better in 2022, but only has 2 years at the position. And then you look at Mims, he only plays 7 games. Now he's dominant in those 7 games, but 7 games over the course of a college career is not a lot. So a lot of doubt about where he's going to be and what he falls into. But I think like those would be the guys I'd probably push down because of just questions about consistency. But in terms of athletic frame, I think if someone took him at 20, if someone took him at 15, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, someone did that. It's like, because the athletic upside with both those guys is pretty insane. So,
all right. So is there a guy that you like either in that group or I'm going to say the next? Well, first of all, stop me when I hit, we've left the tier, right? So the next tier, that's like the top 2 or 3 tiers, whatever the next tier is for you. Stop me when we leave it. I'm going to read off Scouts Inc.'s list. Jordan Morgan out of Arizona, Kingsley Suamatia, BYU, and I believe it's Suamatia. I heard that on Mina Kimes' podcast. I'm saying cool. Suamatia. Sorry, Kingsley Suamatia. Patrick Paul, Dominic Puni, Roger Rosengarten. Out of Washington.
So I'd probably stop you there. I'd say
so
I think
the kid out of Kansas is the last one that you would.
And I think he's a guard for me. Like I don't even have him with the tackles. I think a lot of people have him as an interior player because he's kind of this big barrel-chested guy. But I'd say Jordan Morgan, Kingsley Suamatia, and I'd honestly put Patrick Paul maybe in that group. Again, like you're kind of looking. The reason Patrick Paul for me keeps getting brought up into this upper tier is like in the same reason Amarius Mims and Tyler Guyton might go at 15. Patrick Paul is just a big, freaky dude. He ran well at the combine. He's got 36-inch arms. He's 6'7". He's 340. Like he moves well. And you can't find people like that. So someone's going to take a reach on him. And so if the Commanders picked him and said, hey, man, Cornelius Sugas, you're going to start for the first 6 weeks of the season, but Patrick Paul is going to develop into a starter for us. Like I think that's a decent play for them at 36 or 40. So I'd probably classify those guys together. Kirian Amadiji, that's how I'm going to say his name, from Yale, is a guy that I think is really interesting because of the athletic upside. The problem with him is like he's got physically everything you want. It's just I don't know if I saw the level of physical dominance from him at Yale. So I'm always kind of like with small school guys, like it is a big jump. It's a big jump, especially for offensive linemen, because you go from, blocking kind of untalented college players, no offense to the Ivy Leagues, to blocking real deal NFL football players. And a lot of people have a hard time with that jump. So, and then after that, you mentioned Rosengardner, Blake Fisher, some other guys, Christian Jones, another guy in that kind of next tier who I think are really good football players. I just worry about the athletic upside. So I think it's interesting that kind of that 4th tier, the Jordan Morgan, the Kingsley Suamatia, is that how you say it? Matia, Kirian Amadiji, like those guys have the athletic upside to be something at the next level. And then you get kind of really solid football players after them. Again, Blake Fisher, Roger Rosengard, Christian Jones. But you always question, do you have the athletic ability to be an NFL starter consistency? Like I love Christian Jones's tape. I loved him at the Senior Bowl, but I'm always kind of in the back of my mind saying, are you anything more than a swing guy? Which is not a bad deal, but for the Washington Commanders, that's something you definitely have to be asking yourself.
All right. Last but not least, the freak on this list. I feel like there's actually a couple of guys. Patrick Paul for sure. Amarius Mims. Like there's a couple candidates, but who's your all freak team tackles? I'll give you 2.
I think that's the thing about it is Kingsley Suamatia is like he runs a 5 40 and he's 330 pounds. Like Amarius Mims is the freakiest guy of the bunch because he's 6'8". He's 340. He ran a 5 40. Probably had a 4.9 in him before he pulled his hamstring. His hands, man, like I can't even fathom. His hands are as big as a sheet of paper. They're 11 and a half inches. Like, that's what that looks like. If you can see it, like, that's his hand. Take a piece of paper.
What the hell?
Put your hand on it. That's his hand. How crazy is that? He is a huge man, and they just don't make him like that. And so to have a guy who moves that way, like, I've watched clips of him running bolt upright, Craig, like as tall as he can be, full 6'8", and somebody coming to hit him and him taking a hand and putting it on the DB's chest, and it looks like the DB is ejected like in a cartoon from the screen. And there's just only a couple people on the face of God's green earth that can do that. So in a class of really freaky dudes, like Joe Alt, man, he's 6'9", he's 330, he ran a 5'1", like, he moves really well, he bends really well. Like, Amarius Mims is in a class and a tier all of his own. And so I think, like, that's why this group is, like, probably the most fun to talk about in the draft, especially these top, 10, 11 guys, because they're just, it's so special to get a group of guys that are so consistently athletic and big and physical. Like, it's just a fun group to watch.
All right. So that leads us then to another group where there's a couple of fun guys to talk about, but not quite as deep as the tackles. That's interior offensive line. And one guy that, like, I'm going to separate him out and we're going to spend 90 seconds on him on his own. What is Graham Barton for you? Because I've heard him talked about as a Nate had him as a 4-position guy, right?
Yeah.
He can play left guard, center, right guard, right tackle. He's like, I think he's got plus upside at all 4 of those positions. I think that there are people in the league that say he could start at left tackle. Scouts Inc. has him listed in front of me as a center. What the hell is Graham Barton besides good?
I mean, I think he's good. Like, I mean, that's what he is. Like, I think that's, like, why you love watching him. He's got the physical twitch. Like, when you watch him, again, his pro day was amazing. Like, the way he moved for a man that big. I don't remember if he ran sub 5, but it was close. All of his 3-cone stuff was great. His jump stuff was great for the position. And he reminds me a little bit of Skoronski from last year, kind of a guy from a length standpoint that's probably an interior player, but from a foot speed athletic standpoint could get you by on the outside. He reminds me of Baltimore has a swing tackle. I forget what his name is, but number 65 for them, who, again, he literally can play any position. He's their big tight end, but he's played right tackle, right guard, left guard. I don't know if he can snap, but that's what he brings. And I think he is just a heck of a football player. Just a heck of a football player, and someone that I think is a first-round player. So of this, like, interior group, he's probably my number one guy we're going to talk about. But, like, he played left tackle in his last year at Duke, and I think he looked pretty good at it. I think that's probably not his best position, right? I think he's probably more of an interior player. Like we talked about Troy Fautanu from UW, who I think could play left tackle in the NFL. I don't see that same thing from Graham Barton. So that 4-position flexibility, I think, is probably a good characterization of what he does. But I think in a pinch, he could get you through a couple games at left if you needed to, because of the athlete and because of the mindset that he plays with.
Which is interesting because that's kind of a similar scouting report on Jackson Powers Johnson. There's kind of this thought, and I'm stealing this straight from Nate on Mina Kimes' pod that I listened to a little bit earlier today, but he's like, traditionally center was like not a very good athlete, but they're so smart, we got to find a way to get him on the field. And Jackson Powers Johnson is the opposite. He was like a tremendous athlete who they're like, oh, well, we got to teach you how to play center because this is where you're best at. But he's kind of figuring stuff out. So you got like these 2 incredible athletes that are probably centers or going to be drafted as centers, although we'll see with Barton. But then you got, I would say it feels like a pretty big drop off between those guys and the next group of interior offensive linemen, which includes another center, Zach Frazier out of West Virginia, and then guys like Zach Zinter and Christian Haynes out of UConn. Anybody else that you'd put in kind of that next group of interior linemen?
Yeah, so I think for me, let's have a conversation about Jackson Powers Johnson just for a second. And I think one of the things about him is I don't know if he's the athlete people want to characterize him as. I think he's a true center who could play guard if you needed him to. I think he's a big kind of gap scheme player who's very strong and very powerful. But I don't know if he has like the elite movement skills. So I think he's going to be a little bit of an acquired taste per team. He's not like Linderbaum a couple years ago, who where did he go to school? It doesn't matter where he went to school, but he plays for the Baltimore Ravens now. And he is a playmaking center, right? He can get to the second line. He's your Travis Kelce, right? Or your Jason Kelce, excuse me. He can move really well. He's got good play strength. He can cut off a shade. I'm not sure Jackson Powers Johnson fits in that same type of mold, which is why I'm a little lower on him. I almost think it's kind of between him and Zach Frazier in terms of like what stylistically do you want to be like. If I'm a outside zone team, like Zach Frazier is a really good football player. And I have a lot of admiration for how he's handled the offseason process. I think he broke his leg or something like that late in the year and still participate in the combine. Like he's a tough football playing Johnny. Looked a little undersized, but again, like there's a precedent for undersized center being able to make it work. Then you mentioned, then I probably go, for me, a guy that I like a lot and I'm very high on is Cooper Bebe from Kansas State. He is a heck of a football player, big barrel-chested son of a gun that Fred Smoot comped to Pac-Man, and I think that's a relatively fair comp because he just eats up linebackers, man. And he's got great footwork for kind of how wide he is, and he can run, he can pull, and he's nasty. I got shades of like a poor man's who's the guard for Indianapolis? Nelson.
Quentin Nelson.
Like kind of that big torso that can just run linebackers down. I think he needs some work in pass pro, but I like the edge that he plays with. I like his mindset. And so for me, I could see him being like a top 60 player. So, and then I go Christian Haynes from UConn, very similar type of evaluation, not quite as raw, not tight, doesn't have the raw physicality of Cooper Bebe, but like I loved him at the Senior Bowl, man. Just approached it with the right attitude. Just a dog, just really a dog. And then I'd probably go Dominic Puny from Kansas, just because of how big and how strong he is. And then it gets a little bit dicey. You talked about this already, Craig, about like it's kind of your flavor, right? You got Christian Mahogany from Boston College. You got a physical mauler, but you wonder about the athleticism. Cedric Van Pran, true center, kind of probably the first center off the board if he came out last year, but didn't. Again, wonder about his overall athleticism and what is the true value of the center. So again, there are some guys, but I do think it's not quite as dynamic, in my opinion, as the rest of the class. So.
All right, so
as the tackle class, let me say that.
Right, yeah. So BB is the guy, or Bebe is the guy that you like, I would say, more than others, just to kind of keep with our format here. Sounds like Jackson Powers Johnson's the guy that maybe you're not as high on as some others, but also there's going to be a lot of people that agree with you.
Yeah.
Who amongst the interior lists? Well, let me ask you too, and we'll try to keep this relatively short and keep this moving with some speed here. But like of the late round guys where the Commanders might take a flyer on someone at the guard position especially, is there someone that you like, let's say fourth round or later, that you think could be a starter in the league?
Yeah, I think it's always tough with with an interior offensive lineman because there really is flavor how the interviews goes. Brandon Coleman from TCU, I really liked his film at guard, but struggled a little bit in pass pro at the Senior Bowl. But again, don't overvalue a Senior Bowl performance. Layden Robinson from Texas A&M is a guy that I think is a lot of fun to watch. He plays with kind of this edge, the right kind of mindset, a little bit of a pass pro issue for him, but I just like the edge that he plays with, the power, the explosiveness that he's got. It's just about, can he kind of get it all coordinated and work it out? So, and then obviously Zach Zinter from Michigan is a guy that I think, coming from Michigan, being in that system, big fella, is a guy that probably not a fourth round player, probably more of a third round player, but a guy, if he takes a little bit of a slide, maybe you feel pretty good about it. So.
Whatever it's worth, obviously they've got a lot more guys listed as tackle, but Scouts Inc. has Zinter as their top guard. So
top guard. No, I think
worth.
He's coming off an injury, right? Am I thinking of the right guy? There's so many Michigan guys in this class. So I think Zach Zinter is the guy that tore his ACL late in the year, I want to say. So he would have been the first guard selected probably, but obviously the injury, if it's the guy that I'm thinking of, and there's a lot of guys in my head at the moment, is going to probably miss some of the offseason because of the injury.
Gotcha. Okay. Freak, let's like 15, 20 seconds. Who's the interior line all freak team?
I mean, I think I've already kind of alluded to it. Graham Barton, to me, is the guy that you're just, I like him a lot. I like his film a lot. He tested way better than I thought. He moves well. He moves like, I don't want to say that because he moves like that on the field. So he's a guy that I'd love it if he was a Commander. Him, like Tyler Guyton, Amarius, like those types. I kind of put them in the same category. And if I'm that high on him, usually someone else in the league's that high on him, and usually he's probably not going to get out of the first round. Like on this list that I'm using, he's listed at 29. He's my best interior player at the moment, if you don't count Troy Fontenot, and I'm not going to. I'm going to count him as a tackle, but yeah, really good football player and really freak athlete. So.
And then quick double check. It does look like Zinter had the ACL tear late in the year. So you were correct as usual on that. Next up, Logan, wide receivers. And we could, and some people have done entire wide receiver pods, but we're going to try to cut the fat just to the highest and finest grade of analysis here on a stacked wide receiver class. Let's start off with the top guys. So you have Harrison, Neighbors, Adunze. There's a lot of people obviously on Harrison that have been on Harrison for a long time. The word you hear is like it's the cleanest evaluation people have seen in years. But there are people that like Neighbors or Adunze better. Like 15, 20-second version of the analysis on each. What separates these guys? Like what kind of receivers are they? Let's start with Harrison.
So Harrison is just like, I feel like he can kind of do everything. I think I worry about his like elite athleticism. Like, is he Julio Jones? I don't know because he didn't run, so it's hard to know exactly. But on film, you see a guy that understands route running at a very high level. He catches the football well. He can kind of do anything you want him to do. He has like the stem, the nuance at the top that gets you really excited. So when they say he's a clean evaluation, I totally agree with that. Like it's just so easy to be like Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, if you want to play upside, Malik Neighbors is your guy because he again he's dynamic after the catch. He's got the horsepower you're looking for. He's got that kind of energy, that kind of dog mentality. I don't really like that description, but I think it captures what I'm talking about, like that competitive drive. And then watching Rome Odunze, he's a big fella. He moves well. He's 6'3", 215. And he just has this ability to make contested catches, but also for a big man, he's incredibly smooth. He can sink his weight in and out of cuts. Everything looks easy, which is what I want out of my wide receiver. And I think I'd probably give the edge to Malik Neighbors just in terms of evaluation on film because of the explosive upside. Not over Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm talking over Rome Odunze, but you could talk me into being like Rome Odunze is the second guy in this class, and it wouldn't be very hard because I really like him too. I like what he brings. I like the mentality. I like the approach. I like the professionalism. I think watching him at the combine, watching him move around, watching him interact with the other guys was very impressive to me. So that was something that I valued quite a bit.
All right, the next guy by most sports is Brian Thomas Jr., Neighbors' teammate and obviously Jaden Daniels' teammate at LSU. The scouting report is so easy that I can do it. He's very large and he's very fast. 4.3 fast, enormous human being. He's not as skilled in terms of route running and all that kind of stuff. His hand's not quite as reliable as those top three guys, so that's where the drop-off is. Like the route tree is not going to be quite as much. But if you want that dude to run a go ball or a slot fade or anything that is vertical down the field, that's your dude. Past Brian Thomas Jr., is there, like, how big is the next class for you, the next tier for you? Because I feel like you could draw the line at like 4 or 5 guys, or you could have 25 guys if you really wanted to.
Yeah, and I think it really becomes like stylistically, like what you're looking for, and I think that's why receivers are so tough because like Adonai Mitchell, to me, I think you see more explosive bursts from Brian Thomas Jr. on film, but I also think Adonai Mitchell, at least on film, seems to have more route running nuance and maybe could do a little bit more. But then at the combine, Brian Thomas Jr. showing he can run all sorts of different routes and looked pretty good doing it. Then you got Xavier Worthy, who's kind of in this next group for me. Obviously, speed merchant, broke the combine record for the 40-yard dash. But I think it's also important to note that, like, I think he runs pretty good routes. My question is, like, how does he handle the more physical nature of the NFL game? But I think he's a guy that someone's going to fall in love with. Ladd McConkey is a guy that I think is an excellent slot receiver. Like, he just at the Senior Bowl was uncoverable. That shows up on tape. He's explosive. He's got great explosive measurables, and a guy that I think has a very clear role at the next level. So it really depends on like what you want to value. Xavier Legette is probably outside looking in on that, but a pretty good football player, guy that's tough. Love his story. Love how he competes. So really, if you said, hey man, I'm looking for a big, tough physical receiver, I'd be like, hey, Xavier Legette's your guy. I'm looking for a big guy who's got some nuance who could project to a true number one. I'd be like, maybe Adonai Mitchell. I'm looking for some speed in this offense to take the top off and win some routes underneath. Xavier Worthy or Ladd McConkey. Like this, you know what I'm saying? So it kind of in that next group, that's why this class is so hard. It's like, if you think, like, they're all good. Even Keon Coleman, who I've got some reservations about, or Troy Franklin after the combine, who I've got some reservations about, like, they fit roles today for most NFL teams, which is crazy to say, like, because those are the 9th and the 8th receiver 10th in this class. Yeah, like, it's crazy. So, like, we could just keep going. Roman Wilson from Michigan, great. Ricky Pearsall, crushes, like, awesome. Jalen Polk from UW, like, kind of that physical.
Jalen McMillan from UW.
Like, it's
Malachi Corley.
Yeah, we could just keep going. Like, how do you, like, Devontae Walker, speed merchant, doesn't catch the football great all the time, but Jermaine Burton, if he didn't have any character concerns, he'd probably be in that top group. Brendan Rice, physical big guy. Javon Baker, like can run any route of the route tree. Like, that's 20 receivers that are all going to be playing NFL football next year and making a big impact on NFL teams. And there's more. Like, that's the crazy thing about this class. So
yeah, there's Bub Means out of Pittsburgh, whose name is Bub Means.
Yes, that's right. That's absolutely right. So
there's also Luke McCaffrey, and he's a McCaffrey. So it's just on down the list you go. Who's the guy that you like more than everybody else?
Oh God, this is tough for me because I'm kind of obsessed with this guy, and it's not healthy. And it's Johnny Wilson from Florida State, and it's because like I got into the draft to find big freaky athletes that are good at football. Like that's when I started. Like when I was in high school, I was like, this dude is a big freaky athlete, like Troy Vincent. Like that's how I got on him. Like early, or not Troy Vincent. Vincent Jackson, the receiver, like from his small school, but he's 6'6", big guy. And Johnny Wilson is that guy for me. And the thing that gets me so excited about Johnny Wilson is it's like going to the moon. Like there's never been somebody who looks like him that's played receiver in the NFL. And he's got 35-inch arms. He's got the longest wingspan ever measured at the combine for a receiver position, right? A skill position, like including tight ends. Like he is a massive human. He ran a 4.52 at the combine, which is crazy. And when you watch the film, he does all of the kind of receiving stuff really well, like in terms of stems, breaks, cuts, sinking the hips. Is he competitive enough to play at the NFL level is the thing. But I like him a lot, and I like him a lot more than probably everybody else does. So
who's the guy that you don't like as much as everyone else, where everyone else is like in love and you're like, I don't get it?
Probably Keon Coleman, I would say. I like Keon Coleman a lot, so this is going to sound like I'm hating on Keon Coleman, but a lot of people are like, oh, he's a for sure first-round pick. I'm not in that camp. I think he catches the football well. He's big. He's physical. He's competitive. I think the thing for me is like, is he a good enough separator at the NFL level? That's my big question with him. And it's funny that like both Florida State guys, you flip the questions and you'd get a complete football player. Like I think Johnny Wilson separates pretty well. I think he's got good route running nuance. Doesn't always catch the football consistently, not overly competitive. And then you flip it to Keon Coleman and it's like doesn't have the route running nuance, to kind of shift in and out of cuts and doesn't separate at a high level. So it's like if they could kind of learn from each other a little bit there, they'd both be excellent football players. I think they are going to be excellent football players, but I think you do need to kind of find certain roles for them. You know what I mean? That kind of, and the coordinator needs to be aware of what each of them does really, really well. So,
all right. Anybody else that gets mentioned on the freaks list? We got Worthy, who set the record for 40 speed at the combine. You just mentioned your guys from Florida State. There's some freakiness there. I know Malachi Corley's caught your attention in that, the Western Kentucky kid. Let's make Corley the nominal freakiest player here. What stands out about him?
Malachi Corley, I think his film is a lot of fun to watch. Like he's like everyone comps him to Deebo Samuel, which I think is a little unfair to him, but he's kind of a stockier, almost running back build who can separate in the slot at a high level. And you talk about dog, like dude's got that dog in him. They take that X-ray and there's that pit bull in his chest. And I think that's why he's fun to watch. He is the offense there. And I always wondered about his top end speed, things like that. I don't know if he's run yet. If he ran at the combine, I don't remember. A lot of numbers floating around in there. But when you watch him at the Senior Bowl, I think he can be a true difference maker at the slot that has some outside receiver upside. So I like him quite a bit. And again, it's easy for me to say because like we're like 20 guys deep, and I'm like, Taj Washington from USC, like him too. So, but Malachi Corley, I think, is a little bit different because of the competitiveness that he brings to the position.
If you search Malachi Corley 40 time, you get so many different results. It's stupid. I got a DNP, I got a 4.33, and I got a 4.43. So I don't know. He's fast. All right. Tight end. So
tight end.
Is tight end really Brock Bowers and then everybody else? Is that really the summation of this class?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the thing about Brock Bowers is he's so unique. And I almost did this on the show, but just for keeping the continuity. Like Brock Bowers to me is the 5th best receiver in this class. So that's how I've started categorizing. Like he's not really a tight end. And that's not a knock on him. It's just, I think that's why you got to think about him. He's not like a true inline blocking Y. He's a movement F, right? That you can hand the ball to, he can run choice routes. And that's kind of what he's going to be. And I think that's That's how I've had to characterize him, because I think a lot of coaches are going to make the mistake of putting him as a true Y or a true F, but I think he's much more than that for your offense because of his skill set. So
I've heard the term power slot, which is now becoming in vogue, and like that's kind of what he is. All right, so let's put Bowers to the side then, and think of, obviously like George Kittle's a comp that gets thrown around a lot for Bowers as a pass catcher. Obviously, George is a tremendous blocker who can play that wide position, but that's kind of like the route runner type that you're looking at there. But let's put him to the side for a second. Who else? Like, who's the tight end that you like in this class, and what kind of range are we talking about?
So the guy that I like the most probably is like Jared Wiley from TCU. And so he's way down the list. I know.
He's 11th on Scouts Inc.'s list.
And I think I just see the guys that got paid this last free agency cycle, the Colby Parkinsons of the world. Who was it? Oliver from Baltimore got paid 2 years ago. A guy who can block in line, that can also run the seam, and is smooth enough to beat a linebacker one-on-one. And I think that's what he gives you. And so when you watch his 2022 tape from TCU, he's like getting after defensive linemen. He's long. He's 6'6.5". I think he's like 255, but plays with good leverage, good fundamentals as a blocker. And then you watch him in 2023, and he's got like an 80-yard touchdown reception versus Baylor. So like, I think that's a skill set that when I think about what Kyle values at the position, what Mike values at the position, Mike McDaniel, obviously from Miami, I think that fits exactly what they're looking for. A guy that's going to compete in line and catch the football at a high level and use that big body to shield defenders. Like, he's a guy that I think is way, way undervalued in this class, especially by the media. Like, when you talk to scouts around the NFL, they're a little bit higher on him. Like, he's in the top 3 for some of these guys, but for whatever reason, the media around the draft is not quite there yet. So I don't, for me, it's like I like Jadavion Sanders a lot, but I get confused about the role for him. And I think with Wiley, there's a very clear role where you can be very successful in the NFL very quickly and make a lot of money. So,
is Sanders the guy that everyone else likes a little bit more than you?
I think, I don't know, probably. I think I like Sanders. The thing I would ask someone who likes Sanders a lot is, what is his role at the next level? If you want him to be a power slot, why don't I just draft Keon Coleman or Johnny Wilson? Like, those guys are better than him at that role, right? Because he's not going to compete in line the way you need him to, and I don't know if he's fast and sudden enough to win in the slot the way you think he can, especially in such a deep wide receiver class. So that's where he's basically just a bigger, slower wide receiver. And those guys, in my opinion, unless you're Zach Ertz and have this tremendous feel and nuance and how to, kind of shave angles and things like that in the route and when running routes, it's hard for those guys to be successful. So is he Irv Smith? That'd be my question to people, like, where it's really hard to find and manufacture touches. And is he worth manufacturing touches for? So again, I like his film. I like what he does. I just am like, is there an offensive coordinator that is going to prioritize getting him the football the way he needs to be successful at the NFL level?
All right. Tight end is a traits position. So who is the all freak team tight end that
this one's easy
that we go for?
Easy. Theo Johnson from Penn State. I mean, I knew he was going to test well, like, because he's big, and I think he's 6'6.5". He's like 265. He's big old hoss. Looks a little stiff on film, but man, he murdered the combine. I don't have his numbers in front of me, but I think he ran a 4.5 at 265. I think he jumped over 35 inches. Like, he bench pressed great. I think he had a 10 RAS score, like a perfect RAS score, if I remember correctly, which would have been the highest at the combine. So obviously,
because you can't. That's like you can't do that. That's not supposed to be happening.
I think
he scored an unofficial 9.99 out of 10.
Okay, 9.99. Very close. But he's like that guy in terms of testing. Now, as a football player, little stiff, little mechanical, has a hard time changing direction. He didn't do the 3-cone at the combine. I think there's a reason he didn't do it, because he doesn't change direction at a super high level. But in terms of freaks, like, you're not going to find anybody who's that freaky in any draft usually. So he's a guy that's going to get a shot probably day 3 or third round, because like traits at the position are huge, especially for tight ends. So
what was your raw athletic score?
Probably like a 6.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that to you. It's such an easy cheap shot.
It's fine. We all find different ways to make it to the NFL. You know what I mean?
You know what my raw athletic score is?
It's probably pretty good, I would think.
I don't have one because I wasn't an NFL player. So that's That's the difference between you and I. At least you have one. All right. Running backs, and then we will hit the non-top 4 quarterbacks to close this thing out. But let's hit running backs real quick. And really, I guess the big question is, like, is there going to be a guy taken in the first 2 rounds, or are we wait until round 3, back half of day 2 to get a running back here?
I mean, maybe Trey Benson from Florida State's the guy. He just because he ran well. I think he's big. I don't remember his exact weight at the combine, but I want to say it was like he's 6 foot, 6'1", 215, 220 pounds. So pretty big guy. Ran a 4.39, and I think his film's pretty good. He runs hard. There, in terms of the bag work at the combine, didn't look great, but I think the film kind of makes you feel a little bit better about it. Got kind of a patient running style, but can hit the home run if you need him to. And I think when you look at the running back position, traits, especially in this draft, are going to be extremely important. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks from Texas would be the guy that would be the kind of the first back taken, maybe the guy top of the second round, bottom of the first. Like, we're talking about him in that kind of area, but had an ACL injury earlier this year, so missed a bunch of time, but his film's excellent. Jalen Wright's a guy that I like from Tennessee quite a bit, can absolutely blaze. I think he led the NCAA last year in yards per carry and explosive runs. So I think if I'm looking for good running backs with explosive qualities, I'm going to push them up the board a little bit, as opposed to some of these guys that are maybe better runners, if that makes sense, but lack that explosive upside.
Is there a guy that you like more than everyone else?
I don't know if there's a guy that I like more than everybody else in this class specifically. Like, a guy that I love when I watch film is Ray Davis from Kentucky, but I understand why he's the 5th back or the 6th back. He's like a 6-year player. He played at multiple schools. He's got a lot of tread on the tire, great vision, great competitiveness, great contact balance, but like doesn't have like a superpower, right? So like I know I'm going to put Jalen Wright above him, even though Jalen Wright to me is not quite as an instinctive runner, because Jalen Wright runs a 4.35 and hits home runs and doesn't just get on base. And there's as an offensive coordinator, as an offensive player, I think there's a tremendous value to that.
Can you believe Frank Gore Jr. is in this draft?
That is pretty wild. I just saw that. I mean, he was at the East West Shrine Bowl, so I watched a lot of his highlights from that. But yeah, interesting player for sure.
Yeah, I just can't believe. I mean, Frank played forever, so it kind of makes sense. But dang, it's our time, Logan, where we get to be like, oh, I watched his dad play. That's where we're at. All right. Anything else on the running back position? Freakiest guy?
Freakiest guy. That's a good question. Let me just say this about the running back, just generally. I think a lot of people are going to be down on this class, but I do think there's a lot of guys that fill roles for your team. And so I think that's something to keep in mind with this group, that Marshawn Lloyd, excellent football player, can be a 3rd down back for the Commanders with some explosive playability, right? Ray Davis, we just talked about. Will Shipley from Clemson, kind of this receiver running back hybrid. Tyrone Tracy from Purdue actually played receiver and was converted to the position. Like, there's a lot of really good, I'm going to say good football players that can fill a need if the coach understands what they do well. And I think that's what you need to be thinking about with running backs in this class. So even if they're picked in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, they could be a nice value add, much like Chris Rodriguez was last year for the Commanders. And in terms of freakiness, it's got to be Isaac Guendero from Louisville. That dude murdered the combine. Absolutely murdered the combine. I think he was 6'1", 220, 225, ran a 4.3, jumped 40 inches. I think he had the farthest broad jump at the was an absolute freak. So he for sure gets the nod. I don't know what his RAS score, but I'm sure it was pretty good.
Let's see if I can find it real quick. His athleticism score, 99. In terms of the NFL.com ranking, I don't have the RAS in front of me, but he was 4.33, 41 and a half inch vertical, 10.9 broad.
Mutant.
4.15 20-yard shuttle.
Yeah, mutant.
Oh.
That guy crushed the combine.
Oh.
So he's definitely the freak. Does he always play that way? No. But do you see flashes on tape? Yeah. So he's probably going to somebody's probably going to take a shot on him, no doubt. So.
Last but not least, we circle back to quarterback. We're not going to talk about Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, or J.J. McCarthy, because all we've done is talk about, especially those last 3 for the last couple of months here. So I think there's a lot of questions coming out of Michael Penix's pro day, Logan, about him, because he tested a lot better than people expected. Why is Penix not in the higher group, especially now that he's run like a 4.4 640, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe he's a better athlete than we anticipated?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that Michael Penix Jr. is a good football player. He's like, I think you watch the film, you see him make plays. I think you see the arm talent. I mean, he can absolutely spin the football like at a very, very high level. The thing about him that I think gives me pause in terms of kind of saying he's a true first round player, and I think if he went in the first round, I wouldn't be surprised. But in terms of my big board, is his pocket awareness. I know he doesn't take sacks, but he doesn't move well in the pocket all the time, and he doesn't throw the ball over the middle of the field, and he's not the most accurate player of all time. So, think about who he's throwing to. He's throwing to, Roma Dunze, Jalen Polk, these guys that are great 50-50 receivers, and they made him right. And it reminded me a lot of kind of the old Dallas Cowboy kind of Air Coryell offense, which is this vertical passing game down the field, and Penix was great at that because he had these studs that could make that go. And so you didn't see a lot of him kind of, again, working the middle of the field, working through long progressions. And again, the offensive line there was excellent. I mean, he's going to have 2 tackles that'll probably go in the top 60 in terms of picks. We talked about Rosengard and we talked about Fatano already. And I think the 2 guards are up in next year's class. So like very, very good offensive line, and they played that way. And so I think that's something that gives me a little bit pause. He's older. You don't see kind of some of the more NFL-y type throws on film. Not saying he can't do it. Like I talked to John Beck. I guess he's working with him. They're training together. And he said he had to do some really challenging things in terms of reads and downfield reads and kind of these, is this a post or a corner type stuff? And he has a really good feel for that. So if that's true and he interviews well and he shows a high level understanding of coverages, maybe bump him up the board, but I don't have access to that information necessarily. So that's why I'm kind of a little bit wishy-washy on him, because I think you see the arm talent, you like the experience, you like the athlete, but some of the more quarterback-centric kind of specific stuff gets you a little bit nervous it gets me nervous about him as a first round player.
Yeah. The other thing about like the athleticism piece is he doesn't ever use it. So like if he's 4.46 fast, like that's awesome. He never runs. So like that doesn't really do you a whole lot of good having the club in the bag and then just letting it sit in your bag. That's not who he is as a player. As you mentioned, like the pocket awareness is just not at the level of the other guys, which shows in like the unnecessary throwaways and the lack of movement in the pocket and the lack of scrambles. So he doesn't take a lot of sacks, but that is a misleading number. The other guy that's obviously up there with the top 4 in terms of that next tier, and not really up there with the top 4, but the other guy that gets mentioned and talked about quite a bit is Bo Nix. What is the separator for him? Because there's some interesting like underlying data that goes, maybe Bo Nix could be pretty good. But there's obviously a ton of tape on him. Starter at Auburn, starter at Oregon. What's the plus minus on Bo Nix?
Yeah, I've got a guy that I'm friends with, Matt Schmidt, who emails me every day about Bo Nix and how good he is from an advanced metric standpoint, and he's awesome, and I appreciate all the information he's given me because it makes me smarter. The thing about him that the numbers are great, like those advanced analytic numbers are great. The thing that I always come back to is that offense insulates him so much quick game, so much like kind of quick screens, RPO stuff. And does he make the plays when he's got to make them? Yes. But I think back to like when he kind of had to carry the bag a little bit more at Auburn, and it wasn't great. Now he's grown a lot. I like quarterbacks that have a lot of experience. I also think the other thing is that his physical tools don't wow me the same way as that like top tier group of guys. Now there's a lot of guys that have been successful with kind of less than ideal tools. But I think he's a guy that I like watching his film. I think he's a better athlete than people think of. I think he's got a good enough arm. So I don't want to take that as like a huge negative. For me, the big factor is more the offense and how little heavy lifting he had to do. Like we talked about JJ McCarthy a lot and how every time he throws the ball, it's this huge lift. Bo Nix, it's like they found ways to make sure that he didn't have to do heavy lifting, which is fine. But it gets me nervous, like when it's time to do it against NFL talent. Like, what's that look like? Yeah.
So my guy Tim, a frequent listener to the shows, tweeted me with some interesting stuff. Typically, if you tweet me with multiple tweets of data and information, I'm going to be like, you need a hobby. But this was actually good work from Tim. This is the rare time that it paid off. So His average depth of target on plays that were not screen passes was actually 11.1 yards down the field. So like pretty good. And Tim actually did the numbers. They had 190 passes that were screens, but that left 324 attempts for Nix, which is 84 more than McCarthy had all year total. And on throws past the sticks, the PFF grade was 94.8, which is the same as Jaden Daniels. So like there's some interesting data. And then also 100%. Like he actually sent me another thing that talked about, and I'm sure you got this number too, how good he was over the middle of the field, which is obviously something that a lot of people talk about. His PFF grade was really, really good, especially in the intermediate range. So there's a lot of interesting data, but I think at the end of the day, you go back to the traits part. And I think that people don't want to take quarterbacks high that they don't think are going to elevate their team, which I think is the holdup for a lot of people on McCarthy. And I'm like, well, that means just you haven't watched that kid, but that's a different story. We're not talking about that right now. But like for Nix, if I am a team that is like looking for a solid 2, or I'm like trying to recreate what Kyle did with Brock Purdy, I think Nix is an intriguing option there.
I think so too. I think like Minnesota, team like that, Minnesota, New Orleans.
Like if Minnesota strikes out and can't trade up and can't get their hands on McCarthy and can't get their hands on May or Daniels, whoever it is that they want, and they have to settle and take Nix at 23, like I actually still think that's not, like I think they could be good.
Yeah, I think that's how I agree. I think he needs more around him than some of the top guys do. And I think, you know, an argument that I like for him is that he's going to grow. He could grow into something more kind of the Kirk Cousins of this year's class, who he showed good things at Michigan State, but kind of sat for a year, you know, was in an offense that insulated him and then grew and becomes a player that last year was playing like a top 10 guy. So I do think that's in the cards for him. It's just he does have some growing to do. And, you know, I'm just interested to see what this looks like when he's got to do a lot of serious heavy lifting, because there's also times where, you know, he's making, and everyone does this, so this isn't like a criticism specifically of him, but, you know, where he's forcing throws and doing things where you're like, don't do that, like why, and struggle a little bit at the Senior Bowl. So yeah, there's a lot of things. I like the prospect. I like the player. I have a hard time being like, this is the guy you should pick in the top 10 or whatever, just because the traits aren't there. And again, the way the offense insulated him, I think was another thing that really stuck out to me that makes me a little bit cautious.
Of the next group of guys, your Rattlers, your Pratts, your Miltons, whoever else you want to throw in there, who's the guy you like a little bit more than everyone else?
I don't know. I mean, Spencer Rattler's the guy that I like because I think he could project to being an NFL quarterback at some point, and I don't think that's outside of what the league is expecting, right? I mean, they seem to say he's the next guy, right? It's Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., or however you have those guys.
Yeah, some people put Rattler in the mix with those two and even higher than one or both of them.
Yeah, and I think maybe if you want to go deep cut, Devin Leary from University of Kentucky is a guy that I like. I think he's got some better arm talent than people think. I don't know if he's anything more than a backup at any point in his career, but got a little playmaker to him. Seems like he's going to be UDFA, but you know, if you're looking for just a name, like that's a guy that stuck out to me that I've watched that I thought, hey, you know, this isn't bad to watch. So.
All right, one more guy I'm going to ask you about specifically, because I feel like every couple of weeks we get a comment asking about this guy. What about Jordan Travis from Florida State? Really great year last year until it comes crashing down with a really bad knee injury. Obviously, the rehab is going to be a huge part of this, but like, what is he as a prospect?
Yeah, he's tough. And I told you, I've watched Keon Coleman a ton, and I've watched Johnny Wilson a ton. And one of the things about Travis is I don't think he sees the field at a high level. I don't think he was asked to, but I don't think he does just in general. Like, you got to kind of see guys come open to make the throw, not very anticipatory, and also not very accurate, you know, and I think like that's something that I have a hard time with. I think he's a good athlete. I think he's competitive. I think there's a lot of things to like about him, but in terms of how his game translates to the NFL level, I understand why there's a lot of skepticism about who he is and what he does, because it's like, to me, I want to see you be accurate. I want to see you make certain types of throws. And unfortunately, on his tape, he's throwing to, you know, Johnny Wilson, who I think is an excellent football player, Keon Coleman, who's probably going to be a top 60 pick. And he made those guys work for those receptions. Like, they had to do a lot. And I don't think you want Obviously he seems like a guy that could be a backup, maybe a 3 in some instances, that grows and matures and develops some of these traits we're talking about and becomes a player, but he's definitely not ready right now. I don't think.
Yeah. And by the way, I literally just got this notification. If you're thinking of any of those guys as Commanders QB 3 or 4, unlikely. They just signed Jake Driscoll. So there you go. Breaking news that is not going to be breaking by the time this goes public, because that's not how podcasts work. But the Commanders just signed Jake Driscoll. This whole exercise of going through the position groups like we just did, we're going to do it again later in the week. We're going to do it on the defensive side of the ball. So we will see you
then. We didn't do freaks. What are you talking about, Craig? We got to do freaks for the quarterback.
Yeah, of course.
Who is it?
We get it. It's Joe Milton. It's Joe Milton. He's
just as long as that's clear.
Gigantic, gargantuan size-wise. He has a howitzer attached to his shoulder.
Fast.
He runs fast. Like he's a train that has like a flamethrower attached to it. I don't know what more people want.
Yeah, that's the guy. So he's the all freaks quarterback. But but yeah, I don't know what his completion percentage looks like, but yeah, he's got all the tools you want. So another guy, just throw that name out there.
All the physical tools you want.
Correct. Yes, yeah. Correct.
So we're gonna do this for defense later in the week. That is our show. All praise the arm of Joe Milton, and we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.